In the midst of a foggy field, a young foal is trapped in a rusted metal cage, trembling. Hungry, thirsty, silent, almost as if it has accepted death. But what makes the man stop isn't the cage, it's the mare. A wild horse that has never been tamed. She stands there, just a step away from him, not running, not attacking. She simply looks into his eyes, filled with guilt and haunting. As if she knows he has betrayed her. And now, she's giving him a single chance to redeem himself, save the foal, or live forever with regrets that can never be erased. This story will reflect the mistakes of our past, and how everyone has a chance to make things right, a chance known as tomorrow. Get ready for an emotional journey that will undoubtedly leave a lasting impression and awaken the compassion deep within your soul. Let's begin right now. The sun hadn't risen yet. Cold morning wind swept through the pine trees of northern Wyoming, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and something older, something almost like a whisper from the past. Atop a small ridge stood a wooden cabin, quiet and still, like it had fallen asleep sometime last winter and never woke up. Silas Gray, 67 years old, had lived here alone for nearly a decade, ever since his wife Marianne passed away from lung disease. Folks around town still called him the horseman, or more often, that crazy old stallion whisperer, once known for running one of the finest horse training ranches in the region. But after his wife's death, and after his daughter Clara walked out one morning and never came back, Silas let it all rot. The stables collapsed. The fences split and leaned. And Silas stopped talking to anyone but the ghosts that still lived inside his memories. Each morning, he rose before dawn, brewed a cup of bitter black coffee, pulled on the same faded flannel shirt, and stepped out onto the porch. Just to listen to the wind rush through the trees. Whether it was habit or quiet punishment, even Silas wasn't sure anymore. But that morning, something in the air had shifted. It wasn't colder. It was heavier. And it carried a sense of warning. Silas once had everything, a kind-hearted wife, a bright-eyed daughter who loved animals more than people, and golden fields where mustangs ran wild in the sun. But Silas wasn't the kind of man who said warm things aloud. Clara once told him, "You never loved me the way I needed." And he had answered, "I loved you the only way I knew how." Those were the last words between them before Clara left at 19, leaving behind only silence. The house hadn't felt alive since. Old photographs collected dust on crooked shelves. Marianne's journals remained locked in a drawer, untouched. And the pasture still stretched green and wide, but without hoofbeats, without life. That morning, as low clouds dragged across the sky and fog wrapped itself around the fence posts like a funeral shroud, Silas took the dog for a walk, farther than usual. Something tugged at him, pulling him toward the northern edge of his land, where he hadn't stepped foot since Marianne died. Then he saw it. In the middle of the field, barely visible through the haze, sat a rusted metal cage. Not a hunter's trap. No claw marks. No bait. Just a cage, and inside it, curled into the corner, was a small foal. Its coat was ash gray. Its body thin, shaking. Its eyes wide open, not in fear, but in surrender. Silas stood frozen. Not because of the animal, but because somehow, in that fragile creature's eyes, he saw himself. Just as he took a step forward, a soft huff echoed from the edge of the fog. From within the mist, a shape emerged, a tall horse with a mane the color of burnt embers. It was her. Ember. The wild mare he had only seen in flashes over the years, always from afar, always disappearing like smoke before anyone could get too close. But this time, she didn't run. She stood there, 10 paces away, silent. Her eyes locked on his, unmoving, unblinking, as if she could see straight through his skin, his bones, down into every broken piece of him. She didn't snort, didn't stomp, didn't shy away. There was only silence. The heavy, sacred silence between two creatures who had both been wounded by time. Then, the foal inside the cage let out a sound. Barely a whimper. Weak. Fragile. A plea. Silas knelt down beside the cage. He reached through the bars, his rough hand brushing gently against the foal's trembling nose. "I'm here now, little one," he whispered. "You're not gonna die today. Not on my watch." But the story didn't end there. Silas's journey of redemption had only just begun. As he turned to look back toward the misty woods, a clear feeling washed over him. He would face even darker things ahead. Ember's eyes haunted him, a warning, a reminder that saving Ash wasn't everything. And deeper within the forest, shadows were waiting. There were others who knew this day would come. Silas couldn't take it anymore. He stepped closer to the rusted iron cage, feeling the overwhelming despair in every shallow breath the foal took. The foal looked at him with wide, frightened eyes, too scared to move, as if it knew its life was now in his hands. Silas felt a strange force tugging at his heart, an unfamiliar pull that made him unable to turn away. This wasn't just a foal, it was his last chance. A chance to redeem himself, to undo the wrongs he'd carried for so long. Silas dropped to his knees, reaching his hand through the bars of the cage, and gently touched the foal's trembling nose. The warmth of his hand seemed to soothe the frantic fear in the animal's eyes. A moment of breathless stillness. He could hear its rapid breathing, as if it was trying to send him a message Silas hadn't yet understood. But one thing was clear, he had to save it. "Don't be scared, little one," Silas whispered, his voice firm yet soft, like a vow. "I won't let you die." He stood up and looked around for something to use. The rusty saw and hammer were in the shed, tools from another time, tools he used years ago to mend fences, repair barns, and fix the life he used to have. But today, he wasn't fixing a fence. Today, he was breaking down the barriers he had built around himself over all these years. He turned back to the cage, gripping the hammer in his hands. His breath was fast, but not from exhaustion. His body was tight with a building tension. Each blow of the hammer struck the metal with a deafening clang, reverberating through the stillness of the morning air. It was as though each strike was tearing apart not just the cage, but the silence of his past as well. Sweat dripped down his face, mixing with the blood from his battered hands, but he didn't stop. Each strike brought him closer to what he was determined to do. The foal, Ash, still didn't move. Its eyes were locked onto his, as though pleading for him to finish the job. After a few more powerful strikes, the last metal bar snapped. The door of the cage creaked open, but Ash still lay motionless inside. That's when something strange happened. The mare Ember was no longer standing at a distance. She had come closer, slowly, cautiously, until she was standing just a few feet from him. Her eyes, once filled with wild fear, now shone with something else, something that felt like approval. Silas stood up straight, raising his hand instinctively, unsure why, but sensing that something had changed in the air. Ember stood before him, her gaze no longer filled with distrust, but with trust. Silas didn't speak. But he knew, in that moment, that this was trust he never thought he would receive from a wild creature. Not all horses were the same, and not all of them carried the same deep scars. Step by step, Ember walked toward Ash, gently nudging her foal's body with her nose. Her eyes turned back to Silas, no anger, no challenge, only a soft gaze, as though offering him one last chance. A chance to change. Ember turned away, and before Silas could fully comprehend what had just happened, she disappeared into the woods, moving in a way only wild horses could. She didn't need to look back. She didn't need confirmation. She knew Silas would do what was right. Silas stood motionless, his hands still stained with blood and rust, but his heart no longer felt numb. Every passing second, he could feel the power and life pulsing in his hands, the same hands that had touched Ash's trembling nose. And in that moment, Silas realized that he hadn't just saved a foal, he had saved his own soul. The misty morning scene was no longer the only thing haunting Silas. Though he had broken the cage and freed Ash, questions continued to swirl in his mind. Ember's gaze, that look of acceptance, felt as if she had given him a chance at redemption, but redemption for what? He had saved a life, but could he ever save the things he had lost in the past? And then there were the other clues. The things he couldn't ignore. The things he had to face. Silas couldn't forget the cage. Although he had thought it was just an unfortunate accident, upon closer inspection, he began to realize that everything had a reason. When he returned to where the cage had stood, an unsettling feeling suddenly took hold of him. Ash's eyes were still burned into his memory, and one thought clung to him: this wasn't an accident. At first, he had assumed it was just an old, discarded cage. But as he looked closer, he noticed something: industrial weld marks clearly visible on the iron bars. Old rust, yes, but solid. The kind of welding that couldn't have been done by just anyone. These were done with professional tools, with a clear, deliberate purpose. And this cage, it hadn't been made to trap a wild horse by chance. It had been built to trap it on purpose. Who did this? Silas stood staring at the cage for a moment longer, his mind spinning with 1,000 questions. Who would want to capture a wild horse? A wild horse that was nothing special except for its untamable freedom. And why trap it in this cage? Every question led to one conclusion: someone had intentionally put it there. He bent down, inspecting the ground more closely around the cage. Fresh footprints in the dirt. Not the tracks of a horse. Not the tracks of any wildlife he recognized in these woods. These were human tracks, large, heavy ones, likely from a man. And even more strangely, they circled the cage before vanishing deep into the woods. Was someone watching him? These thoughts swirled in his mind, raising a sense of unease he hadn't felt in years. But that wasn't all. Last night, as he sat alone in his quiet house, he heard strange noises coming from the yard. At first, he thought it was just the wind. But then, in the dead of night, the sounds came again, sounds unlike anything he had heard before. Not the rustling of animals. Not the whistle of the wind. Something else, like footsteps, like someone was moving quietly around his house. Someone was close. Silas turned back to look at the house, where the darkness loomed. The windows were shut tight, but he could feel the presence of something out there, waiting. As if someone was waiting for an opportunity. Silas's steps slowed as he turned to look into the shadows. It had been a long time since he thought about the old days. The days when he lived with Marianne and Clara. The mornings when the whole family would sit around the stove in the fog, talking about the horses Silas had trained. Clara had always been particularly fond of the horses, spending entire summers just caring for them. Silas remembered one time when Clara was just 14. A heavy rainstorm had come down unexpectedly, and a young foal had been swept away by the raging river. Without a second thought, Clara ran after it, rescuing the foal from the floodwaters. It was Clara who saved that foal's life while the floodwaters rushed to carry everything away. It was one of those moments Silas would never forget. That foal had been named Valor. And now, looking back, Silas realized that the foal hadn't just saved a life, it had become a bridge between him and Clara, an unbreakable bond. Now, as he looked at Ash, Silas couldn't help but remember that moment. Clara had saved a horse, and now he was saving one. Was this a sign of something bigger? A chance for him to redeem himself? A chance to regain Clara's love and trust, the daughter who had left so long ago? Silas couldn't shake the unsettling feeling inside him. The footprints, the strange noises, and the feeling of being watched, it all clung to him, refusing to let go. The more he thought about it, the more it seemed like something was wrong, but he couldn't just walk away. Ember's gaze still haunted him, reminding him that what he had done wasn't enough, that there were deeper secrets waiting for him ahead. And so, he knew he couldn't stand still. He had to find out the truth. And the truth, perhaps, lay in the past, a past he had tried so hard to bury. Silas stepped into his cold, silent house, a place where time seemed to have stopped when Marianne passed away. The empty kitchen, once filled with the warmth of shared mornings and tea, now only held faded photographs and empty chairs. But today, Silas wasn't just searching for silence. He was searching for answers, pieces of the past that he had long forgotten but still haunted him. By chance, the dim light from the oil lamp cast a soft glow on an old wooden cabinet in the corner of the room. This cabinet used to hold the most important things of their lives. He stepped over to it, opened the cabinet, and began rifling through the old drawers. In the corner, a small wooden box sat, covered in dust. Silas sighed, sat down, and opened the box. Inside, he found Marianne's old journals. With trembling hands, he flipped open one of the journals. As he turned the pages, familiar handwriting filled his eyes, Marianne's words. The journals chronicled their days as a family, the simple joys, and the love for wild horses. But near the end of one of the journals, a name struck him like a blow to the chest: Gavin Knox. Silas froze, sitting still for a moment as his mind whirled. Gavin Knox. A man he had forgotten for so many years. A man Marianne had mentioned often, always with a hint of concern in her voice. Silas recalled their arguments about Gavin. Gavin was known for his obsession with taming wild souls, as he called the wild horses. But Marianne always refused to sell Ember to him when she was young. Ember isn't a commodity, Marianne had said. She's freedom. She's life. And I won't let that be stolen. That sentence had sparked countless arguments between them. Silas remembered not understanding why Marianne had protected that wild horse so fiercely, while Gavin just wanted to own her, train her, and sell her. Now, Silas felt something shift inside him. Gavin had been part of their lives long ago, and now he was tied to everything that was happening. How could he not suspect that Gavin was somehow behind the trapping of Ash? He couldn't let these doubts linger any longer. Silas continued reading the journal, where Marianne described how she had repeatedly rejected Gavin's offer to buy Ember. She had written, "He doesn't understand horses, Silas. He just wants to tame them, turn them into tools, just like everything else in his life." And then, as the journal entries continued, they grew sparse, fading into emptiness. Silas knew those conflicts had driven a wedge between them, creating a rift that neither of them could mend. Silas feels something familiar. A shiver ran down Silas's spine. The feeling was familiar, as though some force was controlling everything around him. The footprints around the cage. The strange sounds in the night. And now the clues from the past, all of it seemed to point to one person, one event he had overlooked for so long. Gavin Knox. A man obsessed with taming wild souls, a man who might have known too much about Ember, and who might have put Ash in that cage. Silas couldn't ignore it. He stood up, clutching the journal tightly, as if it were the key to unlocking the secrets he had long buried. He knew he had to act. He couldn't let the past suppress his decisions once again. Silas decided he had to find Gavin, to know once and for all whether this man had anything to do with what had happened to Ash and Ember. But as Silas stepped outside, the sense of looming danger still clung to him. He felt that something big, something dangerous, was drawing near. Gavin could be the one behind it all, but who else might be lurking in the shadows, waiting? Were the secrets of the past truly buried, or were they rising again, ready to seek revenge? Silas knew that before he could confront Gavin, he would have to face even greater challenges, a journey from which there would be no turning back. And in the shadows of the wild forest, he felt it clearly, what he was searching for might be something far more dangerous than a wild horse. Silas stepped deeper into the forest, his heart racing with every step. It felt as though he was venturing further into a world from which he could never return. Ember's eyes still lingered in his mind, that quiet gaze full of caution and trust. But now, everything had changed. There was a real danger, and this time, it wasn't just an old cage. Silas could feel it the moment he entered the area where Ember often appeared. As he drew closer to that familiar spot, a cold feeling swept over him, as if a suffocating silence was closing in on everything around him. The thick underbrush and low-hanging branches seemed to hide something. And then, he saw it. A new trap. It was completely different from the traps he had seen before. This was industrial grade, much larger, and far more dangerous. Strong steel wires, sharp metal blades, firmly attached to large hooks. This was no trap that a farmer or a regular hunter could have made. This was a tool of cruelty, a tool designed for hunting with intention. Silas approached, his heart pounding in his chest. He took a closer look and noticed the familiar hoof prints in the dirt, the marks left by Ember. But something wasn't right. Something had changed. Silas crouched down, gently running his fingers over the prints on the ground. It seemed that Ember had tried to navigate around the trap, but had no choice but to get caught by one of the hooks. He rushed over, and as soon as he saw her, his heart clenched. Ember lay there, breathing weakly, with a minor wound on her back leg. It was clear that she hadn't been able to escape this trap without paying a price. Silas sighed quietly, approaching her and kneeling down. He didn't hesitate. His calloused hand gently touched the wound on Ember's leg, feeling her pain, but also sensing her resilience in every movement she made. Moments later, Ember's eyes met his, and there was no panic in them, only determination. She didn't show weakness. Ember seemed to be looking at him as if to say, "My foal, Ash, is safe now. It's time for you to face this danger." Silas carefully wrapped cloth around Ember's leg to stop the bleeding, but he knew one thing for certain: this is no longer just my fight. This wasn't just a threat to wild horses, this was a larger struggle, one that he couldn't face alone. A faint whinny came from behind him. Silas turned and saw Ash standing there, almost sitting down, eyes full of worry, looking toward his mother. The foal seemed to sense the shift in the air, its gaze filled with pain at the sight of Ember's injury. Silas understood right away. It wasn't just about caring for Ember anymore. Both of these wild horses needed his help. And in that moment, he couldn't turn away. He motioned gently for Ash to come closer. The foal took slow, hesitant steps, still uncertain, but finally approaching. Silas placed his hand gently on Ash's small muzzle, reassuring him, making it clear that he was safe, that he would never allow anything or anyone to harm them. After a long moment, Silas carefully led them both back to his land, doing everything he could to shield them from further danger. Though Ember's wound wasn't too severe, Silas couldn't shake the growing unease. This danger was only escalating. Someone was intentionally setting traps, not just to capture horses, but to tear apart the bond between him and these wild creatures. And something inside him told him this was only the beginning. With Ember and Ash temporarily cared for, Silas knew a battle was about to unfold. A battle not only against the unseen enemy lurking in the shadows, but also a battle with the ghosts of his own past. His confrontations with people like Gavin Knox had been long ago, but now the past was rising again, and this time it wouldn't be as easy. Silas had to prepare for a fight he couldn't face alone. A journey from which there would be no turning back, but he was ready to face it. When Silas returned to the farm, his mind was still consumed with lingering worries and the danger that remained uncertain. Ember and Ash needed more care, and while he felt he couldn't face these threats alone, he remembered Shay, a person he hadn't thought of in a long while, but now, perhaps Shay was exactly who he needed. Shay was a young blacksmith, someone Silas had known through Marianne. She had been Marianne's apprentice, the only one to truly master the craft. Silas remembered how Marianne had spoken of Shay often, praising her talent and passion for her work, and how she could create durable and beautiful tools, from plows to the horse gear she crafted. Marianne always said that Shay's hands were strong yet gentle, with a heart full of compassion for animals, especially horses. When Silas called Shay, she didn't hesitate and immediately agreed to come help. Even though Silas's farm had fallen silent, no longer bustling with the activity of old, Shay was always someone who was ready to work, no matter how difficult the task. Shay arrived in the morning, carrying her well-worn tool bag she always kept close. She stepped down from her truck, her dark eyes full of resolve, and her hair tied neatly behind her. Silas watched her, a slight sense of worry flickering, but also a comfort. "Silas, you don't need to worry. I'll help you take care of them," Shay said, her voice calm but filled with confidence. She moved toward Ash, gently patting the foal's shoulder, as though forming a connection with him. Ash looked at her curiously but wasn't afraid. Silas said nothing, standing quietly as Shay began to examine Ember's injury. Shay wasn't just a blacksmith, she also understood horses. She gently stroked Ember's coat, checking the wound, and began cleaning the minor cuts on her leg. The way she treated the horse was tender, every movement showed that she truly cared for these creatures. Silas couldn't help but be impressed by her knowledge and skill. "You're doing a great job," Silas said, his eyes full of appreciation. Shay looked up at him and gave a soft smile. "Thank you, Silas. Marianne taught me a lot, about more than just blacksmithing. She also taught me how to care for horses. I remember her always saying, 'Horses have souls, Shay. Just like people.'" A wave of sadness washed over Silas. Marianne's words echoed in his mind once again, reminding him of the days when they worked together, caring for the horses. But now, all of that was just memory. While Shay worked, Silas quietly sat on a wooden bench outside, his eyes drifting toward the distant hills. Shay carefully tended to Ash, but then she suddenly turned, her expression thoughtful. "Silas, I want to tell you a story." "A story about myself," Shay began, her voice growing more serious. "You might not believe it, but it happened. Once, when I was a little girl, I was in a car accident." Silas looked at her and nodded, silently urging her to continue. "We were driving on a small road near the farm. My mother was driving, and we lost control. The car flipped into a deep creek. I was knocked unconscious and didn't know anything, but there's one thing I remember clearly. When I woke up, I saw a horse standing beside me. It was a wild horse, brave, unafraid to see me. It helped me get up and guided me out of the wreckage. After I was rescued, I never saw that horse again. Silas listened, his eyes filled with emotion. "Would you say that horse saved your life?" he asked, his voice thick with feeling. Shay nodded. "Yes, I believe it did. That horse saved me, not just with its strength, but with its resilience. And from that day on, I knew that horses are powerful souls, capable of bringing hope and salvation." Silas looked at Shay, understanding her better now, understanding why she had such a deep bond with horses and why she could relate to them so deeply. "So, what do we do now to protect them? Both Ash and Ember can't stay here alone." Shay nodded. "We have to make sure that all the hunters and the evil ones know that no one can harm these creatures. Anyone who tries will pay the price." With Shay's help, Silas felt a little lighter. But he knew that everything was far from over. The signs of the enemy were still unclear, and the fight to protect these wild horses was only going to get tougher. Silas understood that this time, he couldn't fight alone. Shay, with her resilient heart and love for horses, would be an essential ally on this journey. But they would have to face an enemy they hadn't even imagined, an enemy who wasn't just cruel but also cunning, and might be watching them from afar. Silas's anxiety grew with every step he took into the foggy forest. Each footfall echoed in the heavy silence, but inside, there was a restlessness he couldn't suppress. The traces of Gavin, the subtle signs of his presence, led him deeper into the wild, empty hills. Silas knew that no matter how difficult it might be, he couldn't avoid this confrontation. Gavin had been part of his life for too long, and now everything had come to a head. As he ventured further into the forest, the air felt even heavier. Darkness seemed to swallow everything around him, branches swaying as if hiding dark secrets. Suddenly, Silas stopped. A figure appeared ahead, standing still in the shadows, like a familiar silhouette he hadn't seen in a long time. Gavin. He stood there, his dark eyes fixed on Silas. There was no surprise, no greeting. He had been waiting for this moment. Silas stared at Gavin, anger flaring within him, but he didn't rush. "I knew you'd come," he said, his voice low and cold. Gavin said nothing at first. He simply smiled, a chilling grin, as if he was all too familiar with the tension of such confrontations. "So you know what I want, Silas," he said, taking a step closer. Silas clenched his fist, locking eyes with Gavin. "I don't understand why you're doing this. Ember isn't your property. It's a free creature." Gavin chuckled softly, his eyes gleaming with arrogance. "Free? The so-called freedom it has is nothing more than wildness that can't be controlled. It's a wasted asset, Silas. A creature that belongs to no one, worth nothing except its potential for taming." Silas stepped forward, fury rising in his chest. "Don't call my horse property. It's a living being, not a commodity." Gavin steadied Silas for a moment, his cold eyes calculating. "Well then, Silas, let me tell you about a new plan. Ember could be part of something much bigger than this rundown farm of yours. I'll catch it, train it, and sell it to a circus. It will become a symbol of what I call the wild tamed. A tribute to how wildness can be controlled by man." Silas heard these words like a slap to the face. Gavin didn't just want to catch Ember, he wanted to turn it into a tool to display mankind's power over nature. "You're insane," Silas said, his voice tight with tension. Ember is not some animal to be made a joke for others. It's freedom. It's instinct. You have no right to do that. Gavin was unfazed, raising an eyebrow, his expression dripping with self-satisfaction. You'll see, Silas. I've done this many times. I'll tame Ember, make it part of a world you can't understand. And you won't be able to do a thing. Silas felt blood rush to his head, but he forced himself to stay calm. I won't let you do that. Not to Ember. Not to any horse. Gavin took a step back, but the smile never left his face. Fine. Let's see who wins in the end. But don't think you can protect them forever. I'll find a way to get it, one way or another. Silas tightened his fists and took a deep breath. If you think you can just take my freedom and Embers, you're wrong. Gavin paused for a moment, his gaze flickering, but only for a second before he turned away, his eyes as cold as ice. We'll meet again, Silas. And when we do, you'll understand what the truth really is. Silas stood there, his heart pounding in his chest. He heard the threat in Gavin's voice, but this time, he wasn't afraid. The battle had begun, and he would not let anyone take what he loved. Silas stood in the darkness after the tense encounter, but everything was far from over. Gavin had revealed his intentions, and now Silas knew he couldn't continue fighting alone. The threat wasn't just from one person, there were deeper schemes lurking in the shadows. With resolve in his heart, Silas knew that the journey to protect Ember and Ash had never been more dangerous. He would have to prepare for a confrontation whose outcome was uncertain. Silas couldn't shake the storm building in his chest as he walked deeper into the forest. With every step, he felt himself sinking further into a world of shadows, where the signs of Gavin's presence became clearer, more ominous. There was no more doubt. Gavin had prepared a far more vicious plan than Silas could ever have anticipated. In the days that followed, Silas realized something wasn't right. New signs appeared throughout the woods, industrial traps that Gavin had set everywhere, hidden under layers of leaves, behind every tree trunk. A quiet, creeping threat, one that no one could have predicted the full extent of. The threat was growing clearer by the day. Every time he led Ash and Ember into the forest, Silas was on edge, constantly watching over them. Then, everything changed in an instant, one filled with unbearable pain. One morning, as Silas led Ash deeper into the forest in search of food, he suddenly heard a frantic cry echo through the trees. A cry filled with terror. Silas turned on his heels and rushed toward the sound. His heart sank when he found Ash lying on the ground, its back leg caught in an enormous steel trap. Blood stained the earth, and the foal thrashed in agony. Silas rushed to the trap, trying desperately to open it, but it was solid, firmly locked. Meanwhile, Ash continued to gasp, its eyes wide with pain and fear. Silas's heart felt like it was shattering, each agonized cry from Ash raking at his soul. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Silas freed Ash from the trap. The foal shakily stood, but it was weak, its legs trembling. Silas cradled the injured foal in his arms, feeling the weight of its suffering. "Don't worry, little one. I'll take care of you," he whispered, but deep down, he knew this wasn't just a simple wound. Ash would need time to heal, and Silas couldn't keep it out here alone for long. But when Silas turned to find Ember, the mother horse was gone. Her familiar silhouette, which he had always seen standing somewhere in the woods, had vanished. At first, he thought Ember might have just wandered off to find food or was staying away to avoid the traps set by Gavin. But as the day stretched on and Ember didn't return, Silas grew more anxious. He called out her name, but the only answer he got was the echo of his own voice, no response from the horse. His heart pounded in his chest as a wave of worry swept over him. Something had happened to Ember. And he knew Ash wasn't the only one in need of help. Ember couldn't be left out there alone either. Silas searched the woods, but found nothing but more signs of Gavin's traps, the new devices of destruction, and a growing sense of helplessness. Ember was gone, and Silas felt the shadow of his enemy lurking somewhere in the darkness. That night, Silas sat by a small fire on the farm, its weak light casting long shadows over his weary face. Despair overwhelmed him, as if the world itself were turning against him. The images of Ember, of Ash, along with the traps Gavin had set, made him feel like he was standing at an impossible crossroads, unable to move forward. Then, a memory from long ago flashed in Silas's mind, causing his heart to tighten. Clara. His daughter, the one he hadn't heard from in so many years. She had left when she was just 19, without a word. The feeling of emptiness, the sense of failure as a father, had haunted Silas all this time. And now, with everything falling apart, he realized that only Clara could understand him, only she could help him escape the despair that consumed him. He picked up the phone, his hands trembling as he dialed Clara's number for the first time in 7 years. The anxiety bubbled up inside him, but he couldn't turn back. He needed help. He needed Clara, even if it was just for a word of advice, or to hear her voice. After what felt like an eternity, the phone rang. Silas sighed, feeling the weight of uncertainty, until finally, the familiar voice on the other end answered. "Hello? Dad." Clara's voice came through, and all the emotions that had been buried for years erupted within him. Silas couldn't begin to express what he felt hearing Clara's voice again, but he knew this conversation would open a new chapter in his life. The bond between him and his daughter, though frayed, could now begin to heal, for a greater purpose, to protect what he loved, to safeguard the wild horses he had promised to care for. And in the darkness of the wild forest, where traps and dangers awaited, Silas understood that this journey could not stop now. A new confrontation was on the horizon, and this time, he wouldn't be alone. Silas couldn't believe his ears when he heard Clara's voice on the phone. But as soon as she greeted him, all the emotions he had kept bottled up for years suddenly came rushing out. Despite their long separation, to Silas, Clara was still his daughter, the one person who could help him face the challenges ahead. They didn't speak for long, but with every word exchanged, the awkwardness and uncertainty slowly faded away. Clara listened intently as Silas explained the situation, the traps Gavin had set in the woods, Ash's injuries, and Ember's disappearance. After a brief silence, Clara spoke, her voice filled with determination. "Dad, I'm coming back. I can't leave you to face this alone. I'll bring a wild horse rescue team from California. They'll help us save Ember and destroy all these traps." A wave of relief washed over Silas. Clara was coming back. Not only had she heard his call for help, but she was also ready to join the fight to protect the wild horses. He wasn't alone anymore. A few days later, Clara arrived with the wild horse rescue team from California. These experts were skilled and experienced in rescuing wild horses from dangerous situations, and they had all heard about Silas's story. They had come prepared with all the necessary tools to handle any situation and were ready to face Gavin, no matter how dangerous he was. When the team arrived at the farm, Clara immediately embraced Silas tightly, as if trying to convey everything she had missed over the years. "Dad, I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner. But I'm here now. We're going to save Ember." Shay, standing beside Silas, looked at Clara with empathy. She had heard about Clara from Marianne's stories, and now she could sense the resolve in this woman. Clara might not be a professional horse trainer, but her love and determination for the wild horses were undeniable. Once the rescue team was ready, Silas, Clara, and Shay got to work. Shay and Clara worked closely together, searching for Gavin's traps, destroying them, and looking for Ember. The three of them split into smaller groups, heading deeper into the woods where Ember might be hiding. Shay was not only a talented blacksmith, she also understood horses. Every action she took while caring for Ash, every time she dealt with the traps, showed professionalism and dedication. Clara stood by, her gaze filled with determination, never taking her eyes off every step her companions took. Meanwhile, Silas kept a watchful eye from a distance, feeling a sense of reassurance with Clara and Shay by his side. Every step they took was not just an action to protect the wild horses, but also a way to heal the fractured bond between him and Clara. Each look from his daughter brought warmth and love that he thought he had lost forever. As Silas's team approached the area they suspected Gavin might be hiding, the tension reached a breaking point. Silas could feel the enemy's presence, as if Gavin was lurking somewhere in the shadows, watching them. Just moments later, Silas was attacked. Gavin appeared from the darkness, charging at him with brutal force. Silas and Gavin wrestled in a violent struggle. Gavin fought fiercely, trying to bring Silas down, but Silas refused to give in. In the midst of the struggle, Clara and the rescue team quickly arrived, spotting Gavin trying to flee. With their help, Gavin was captured almost immediately. He couldn't escape, and the situation was resolved. Gavin was arrested for illegally setting traps and attacking Silas. He was no longer able to carry out his cruel plans. With Gavin finally apprehended and Ember saved, Silas felt a sense of relief, but there was still much to do. The battle was won, but the scars left behind, both physical and emotional, would take time to heal. As Clara stood beside him, looking out over the land, Silas knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. The ties that bound them, once broken, were beginning to mend. And as they prepared to return to the farm, the wild horses, and the land they had fought to protect, Silas realized that together, they were stronger than ever before. The air was thick with anticipation as Silas stood at the edge of the forest, looking out over the land. It had been days since they had captured Gavin and destroyed the traps. Ash had finally recovered from his injuries, and for the first time in what felt like ages, Silas felt a glimmer of hope. But despite the relief of seeing Ash healing, something still weighed heavily on his heart. Ember was still missing. He had searched the woods high and low, but there had been no sign of her. He had expected her to return once the threat of Gavin was over, but she hadn't. Silas couldn't help but feel that the bond between them, the bond forged through years of trust, had been broken, and that Ember might never return. Still, he held on to the belief that she would come back to him, even if it took time. As the days passed, Silas and the rescue team focused on rebuilding the farm, clearing out the remnants of Gavin's traps, and ensuring the land was safe for the horses. Clara, Shay, and the rest of the team worked tirelessly alongside Silas, their efforts slowly but surely bringing a sense of normalcy back to the place. But Silas couldn't ignore the emptiness that lingered in his heart, the space that Ember had left behind. The land was healing, but he wasn't sure if his soul ever would. It was late one afternoon when Silas was standing by the barn, staring into the fading light of the day. The breeze was gentle, carrying the familiar scent of the forest. He had just finished his work for the day when he heard the soft crunch of hooves on the dry ground behind him. He turned around slowly, his heart catching in his chest as he saw her. Ember. The wild mare was standing a few paces away, her dark eyes locked on him. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The bond between them was palpable, stronger than any words could describe. She stood tall and proud, her mane flowing in the wind, but there was something different this time. There was a softness in her gaze, a kind of understanding that hadn't been there before. Silas's breath caught in his throat, and his heart swelled with emotions he hadn't allowed himself to feel in so long. He had feared that he might never see her again, that the connection they shared had been lost forever. But now, here she was. Ember stepped forward, slowly and cautiously, as if she were unsure whether to trust him completely. Silas took a step toward her, his movements slow and steady, his hand outstretched. "Ember." His voice cracked, but he didn't care. "I've missed you, girl." The mare stopped just a few feet away from him. Silas could feel his heart pounding as he knelt down, lowering himself to her level. Ember didn't back away. Instead, she bent her head toward him, her eyes softening as she took a step closer. In that moment, Silas knew. This wasn't just a reunion between man and horse, it was a reunion between two souls who had been through so much together, and now, against all odds, had found their way back to each other. Ember's movements were gentle as she stepped closer, her head bowing slightly as if in gratitude. Silas's eyes filled with tears. The mare's gesture was a quiet but powerful acknowledgement, a simple way of saying thank you for never giving up on her. He reached out slowly, his hand grazing her mane, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a deep sense of peace settle over him. The years of struggle, the battles with Gavin, the uncertainty of what would happen next, all of it seemed to melt away in this moment. He was here with Ember, and that was all that mattered. Silas took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everything he had endured. Ember, standing before him, had been a part of his life for so long. She was more than just a horse, she was a symbol of resilience, of strength, of freedom. And now, here she was, back where she belonged. Ember nuzzled his hand, a gentle reminder of the trust they had shared all those years ago, a trust that had been tested and ultimately restored. Silas smiled through his tears, his heart full. But as Silas stood there, still kneeling in front of Ember, something unexpected happened. The mare pulled her head back slightly, her dark eyes meeting his one last time. And then, as if making a decision, she turned away. Silas stood up quickly, calling out to her, "Ember, wait." But Ember didn't look back. She walked slowly, purposefully, toward the edge of the forest, her tail flicking behind her like a final goodbye. Silas's heart ached as he watched her go, but there was a deep sense of understanding in the moment. This was Ember's choice. She was wild, untamed, and as much as Silas wanted to keep her close, he knew that she would always be free. Ember paused for just a moment at the forest's edge, turning her head to glance back at him. Her gaze was steady, filled with something that could only be described as silent gratitude. Then, without another word, she disappeared into the trees, her form blending into the shadows of the forest. Silas stood still, the tears still fresh on his cheeks, his heart heavy but full of peace. He knew that Ember had returned to where she truly belonged. And though she was walking away, he felt no bitterness, no sorrow. Only an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the time they had shared and for the freedom Ember had found. As Ember disappeared into the wild, Silas felt a calm settle over him, but there was also a new understanding within him. The journey wasn't over. There was still work to be done, still dangers to face, but now, with Ember's return, Silas had found something he hadn't even known he was looking for: peace. The world was a little less dark now, and as he turned to head back to the farm, Silas knew he wasn't alone. He had his daughter, he had Shay, and the wild horses. Now, they were no longer just a dream he was fighting for. They were a living testament to everything he believed in. And in the quiet of the forest, where the wild winds whispered, Silas knew that their journey was only just beginning. Silas stood at the edge of the farm, looking out over the fields he had worked for so many years. The sun was low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the land. He could see Ash grazing quietly in the distance, his form strong and sure, a living symbol of the resilience and freedom he had fought so hard to protect. A quiet peace had settled over the farm, but Silas knew that this peace, like all things, was temporary. The time had come for him to make a choice. The farm, his home, had been a place of both struggle and hope, a place that had witnessed his greatest losses and triumphs. And now, it was time for him to let go. Clara had come a long way. From the young girl who had walked away years ago to the woman who had returned to help save the horses, Silas had watched her grow, learn, and prove herself capable of taking on the responsibility he could no longer carry alone. His heart swelled with pride as he thought about her. It was Clara's time now. The farm was hers. Silas had made his decision. The legacy he had built, the lessons he had learned, all of it would be passed to her, and it was up to her to continue what he had started. He had done his best to keep it alive, but now it was her turn to make it thrive. He turned to look at Clara, who was standing near the barn, her eyes scanning the horizon. She looked so much like Marianne at that moment, her figure framed by the setting sun, the same determination in her gaze. "I think it's time, Clara," Silas said, his voice thick with emotion. "The farm, it's yours now. You've earned it." Clara looked at him, her face softening. She had always known that one day, this would happen, but hearing it from Silas brought a rush of emotions. The years of silence, of distance, had been difficult, but now, here she was, standing at the crossroads of their shared past. "Thank you, Dad," Clara said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "I promise I'll take care of it. I'll keep it safe. Just like you did." Silas glanced over at Ash, who had become a part of this land, a living testament to the battles fought and the sacrifices made. The Foal, who had once been injured and vulnerable, now stood strong and proud. Ash was no longer just a symbol of Silas's struggles but of hope, of resilience, and of a new beginning. It was clear to Silas that Ash belonged here, among the rolling hills, and the fields that had seen both joy and sorrow. This land would always be home to the wild spirit of the horses, and Ash would continue to represent that spirit, unbroken, unyielding, and free. "He stays with you, Clara," Silas said, a soft smile tugging at his lips. "He's a part of this place now. He'll help guide the next chapter." Clara nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. She stepped toward Ash, her hand outstretched, and the foal took a few hesitant steps toward her. There was a bond forming between them, one that Silas could see would grow stronger with time. Later that evening, as the sky turned deep purple and the first stars began to twinkle, Silas sat down at his old wooden desk in the farmhouse. The room was quiet, the only sound the soft crackling of the fire in the hearth. He pulled out a journal, his final one, and began to write. He had written countless entries over the years, documenting his experiences, his lessons, and his reflections on life. This journal, however, would be different. This would be his legacy, his final words, his way of passing on everything he had learned to Clara. With his pen poised over the page, Silas began to write. To Clara. I've lived a life of many lessons, some learned the hard way, some I wish I could forget, and others that I'll carry with me until the end. But the greatest lesson I've learned, Clara, is this: the freedom of a horse is not something to be tamed, but something to be respected. The land we live on, the creatures we care for, and the people who love us, these are the things that make life worth living. I've seen the strength of the wild, the resilience of the broken, and the power of forgiveness. And now, it's your turn to carry on what we've started, to protect the things that can't protect themselves. I may be leaving, but I know you're ready. You have the heart for it, just like your mother did. I'm proud of you, Clara. I always have been. The horses, the farm, everything here, it's yours now. Make it your own. But never forget the lessons we've learned together. And if you ever need me, know that I'm never too far away, and the wind that blows through the trees, and the hooves that beat against the earth. Love, Dad. Silas closed the journal, placing it on the desk. He felt a strange sense of peace as he sat there, looking out the window at the land that had been his home for so long. The weight of the world seemed to have lifted off his shoulders, and for the first time in many years, he felt a quiet, lasting sense of contentment. Through this story, we come to understand that horses are not just animals, they are living symbols of freedom, carrying memories tied to journeys we may not have fully realized. Sometimes, they are the miracle that heals wounds we cannot put into words. In them, we see resilience and self-reliance, qualities that humans often forget amidst the complexities of life. Not everyone deserves the trust of a wild creature. Horses only offer their bond to those who have the patience, respect, and a heart large enough to understand the value of the freedom they bring. And when you are chosen to connect with such a free spirit, you're not just granted trust, you've been given a priceless gift that few will ever experience. Freedom is not about running away, it's about daring to live true to your nature. It's not about seeking an escape from every challenge, but about having the courage to face the truth and trusting the path you choose, no matter the cost. Freedom is the highest price to protect your identity and uphold the values that matter most in life. This story reminds us that every important decision in life is not just about the paths we choose to walk, but also about the rights and responsibilities we bear in protecting greater values, like freedom, love, and the protection of the vulnerable beings we have promised to care for.